At OTA 5 of the 2026 Cleveland Browns offseason, cameras were rolling, reporters were present, and Jeudy walked up to a microphone and delivered a 30-second answer that may have permanently damaged his standing as the team's #1 wide receiver. Not because of anything he did between the white lines. Because of the words he chose to say in front of every camera present at the Browns facility during the most scrutinized quarterback competition evaluation window of the entire offseason. This moment did not happen in a vacuum. It was the final chapter of a story that has been building since week 13 of 2025, and when you lay out every data point in chronological order, the pattern is impossible to ignore. When a reporter asked Jeudy about Deshaun Watson's physical condition and performance during OTA 5, Jeudy responded, "He looked a lot more confident, a lot more comfortable. You know, just having those days, giving his time to prepare himself mentally and physically. He's coming out here looking real good." Those were his words. On live television. During an open quarterback competition. While Shedeur Sanders was competing for the starting job right alongside Watson. The offensive coordinator had publicly stated that nobody was ahead in the competition. The coaching staff had praised Shedeur Sanders, noting that he had come miles in his development. The organizational message entering OTA 5 was clear and consistent: this competition is open, and no decision has been made. And then Jeudy stood in front of a microphone and delivered an unprompted performance review of one quarterback over the other. This was not a rookie answering out of ignorance or inexperience. Jeudy is a veteran receiver who has been embedded in this organization, in this quarterback situation, and in the controversy surrounding this competition throughout the entire 2025 season and into the 2026 offseason. Nobody asked him to compare the two quarterbacks. Nobody asked him to pick a side. The question was about Watson's physical condition, and the answer he gave was a public endorsement delivered on live media during the competition window, in front of every reporter and camera at the facility. The context surrounding who Jeudy is in this story makes the moment significantly worse than it would be in isolation. This is the same receiver whose drops directly damaged Shedeur Sanders' statistical record during the 2025 season. This is the same receiver whose fumble in Las Vegas, during a game analysts described as one of Shedeur's strongest performances, created real, documented consequences for a developing quarterback's evaluation at a critical moment. And this is the same receiver who confronted Shedeur Sanders on the sideline during the 49ers game on national television. Now he is on camera at OTA saying Watson looks real good. That is not a neutral teammate answer. That is a receiver communicating a preference publicly, on camera, where everyone can see it. To fully understand why the OTA 5 moment carries the weight it does, you have to understand the complete Jeudy timeline, because none of this started at OTAs, and every single data point on this timeline points in the same direction. Week 13, 2025, during the 49ers game, on national television, during a 26-8 loss, Jeudy confronted Shedeur Sanders on the sideline, clapped his hands in his face on live TV, in front of the entire country. Shedeur Sanders' public response to that moment was, "We resolved that. We're not going to speak on that." He never threw Jeudy under the bus. Not once, through any of it. That is the foundation of this story, a receiver who created a national television incident and a quarterback who absorbed it publicly without retaliation. Then came the Las Vegas game. Analysts covering the game were unified in their assessment: Shedeur Sanders was playing out of his mind. And then Jeudy fumbled. A Shedeur throw. Directly affecting the developing quarterback's stat line at the precise moment he was building momentum and proving himself in real competitive situations. Then came the production numbers from the 2025 season, and they are damning. In 2024, Jeudy caught 90 balls for 1,229 yards. In 2025, on the biggest contract extension of his career, $10.3 million in 2026 alone, he caught 50 balls for 602 yards. His production was cut in half. His inaccurate target rate jumped from 10.3% to 16%. His drop rate sat at 15%. Those are not quarterback problem numbers. Those are receiver performance numbers, and they tell a clear story about what happened to Jeudy's production during the 2025 season. Then came the off-season decision that removed any remaining ambiguity about where Jeudy's loyalty sits. Instead of working out with Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback competing for the starting role, Jeudy traveled to Florida for private workouts with Deshaun Watson. A quarterback who has played 19 games in 4 seasons. A quarterback coming back from bilateral Achilles tears at age 30. That was a deliberate, public, documented choice about which quarterback Jerry Jeudy wants throwing him the ball. After his 2025 drop rate became impossible to ignore, Jeudy spent the offseason working on concentration drills specifically designed to address the problem. The Browns organization and the media both documented it. He stated publicly that he was committed to fixing the issue. And then, at OTA 5, he dropped a Watson pass anyway, after concentration drills, after the entire offseason of preparation. He dropped the ball. And then praised Watson on live television. The complete timeline runs as follows: sideline confrontation, Las Vegas fumble, production collapse, private Florida workouts with Watson, concentration drills that did not stop the drops, OTA drop, Watson endorsement on live media. Every single step moves in the same direction. If the Watson endorsement at OTAs was the most visible Jeudy moment of the offseason, a separate quote delivered earlier was arguably the most revealing. When reporters asked Jeudy about having the same two quarterbacks returning in 2026, Watson and Shedeur, Jeudy responded with 2 words: about time. 2 words. No names. Complete message. About time, about Watson returning. About a 30-year-old quarterback coming back from bilateral Achilles tears who has played 19 games in 4 seasons being on the same roster as a developing second-year quarterback with legitimate starting potential. That is not a neutral teammate response. That is a receiver communicating, without using names, without making it obvious to anyone who was not paying close attention, exactly which quarterback he considers his QB1. And he delivered it on camera, for any reporter present to capture and distribute. The same media and analyst community that labeled Shedeur Sanders emotional, immature, and difficult to play with following the sideline confrontation applied a fundamentally different standard when examining a similar situation involving Kyler Murray and J.J. McCarthy. Murray was asked directly about competing with McCarthy for the starting job. His public response was measured and team-first. He acknowledged McCarthy's youth, offered to share knowledge, and framed both of them as competitors who want what's best for the team. The media praised that answer. J.J. McCarthy, when asked about his relationship with Murray, visibly stiffened in the interview, described the situation as 2 guys in a classroom, stated he would not call it awkward, but his body language in the moment told a clearly different story. Analysts noted it. Nobody called it a character concern. Nobody labeled McCarthy emotionally immature or described him as a locker room problem. Now apply that same standard to Shedeur Sanders. After a sideline confrontation that Jeudy initiated, not Sanders, Shedeur's public response was, "We resolved that. We're not going to speak on that." That is a composed, team-first, veteran answer by any measure. And the quarterback who delivered it was called emotional, difficult, and a locker room liability. In this situation, it is not Shedeur Sanders choosing sides publicly. It is Jeudy. The receiver making $10.3 million. The receiver with the 15% drop rate. The receiver who traveled to Florida to work out with Watson instead of building chemistry with the second-year quarterback he is supposed to be developing a working relationship with. Apply the same scrutiny to Jerry Jeudy that was applied to Shedeur Sanders, and the Watson endorsement on live media at OTA 5 becomes the most nakedly disloyal receiver moment of the entire 2026 Browns offseason. The standard has to work in both directions. Either public composure under pressure is valued across the board, or the evaluation system itself is broken. The narrative problem Jeudy created at OTA 5 does not exist in isolation, it sits directly on top of a roster construction reality that was already moving against him. The Browns' projected receiver depth chart heading into training camp lays out the situation in concrete terms. KC Constant is locked in at the slot receiver position. Denzel Boston, drafted at pick 39, is working at the X-receiver spot and has drawn significant praise from the coaching staff. Coaches describe themselves as highly impressed by his performance, stated that they are building specific packages around him, and indicated that they are falling in love with his game. Jerry Jeudy sits at the Z receiver position, the same position where his inaccurate target rate jumped from 10.3% to 16% in 2025, and he is now one dropped pass away from a WR4 conversation. Isaiah Bond is emerging as WR4, with the coaching staff specifically mentioning him as a player they are building packages around. That depth chart is not the result of random personnel movement. The Browns drafted Denzel Boston and developed Isaiah Bond specifically to create genuine competition at the receiver position, and specifically to have viable alternatives in place if Jeudy's drop rate and his public conduct continued on their current trajectory. During OTA work, Boston ran a double move on Tyson Campbell, an established starting cornerback in the NFL, and won the rep on a 50-yard route. He is competing for every catch. He is performing like a player who understands he has to earn the spot one rep at a time. Jeudy dropped a Watson pass after an entire offseason of concentration drills and then praised Watson on live television. The contrast between the two receivers in terms of conduct, performance, and approach during the 2026 offseason evaluation window could not be more direct. $10.3 million, 50 catches, a 15% drop rate, and a damning offseason timeline sits on one side of that depth chart equation. A second-round pick who coaches are raving about and building specific packages around sits on the other. That math does not favor Jerry Jeudy. Through all of it, the sideline confrontation, the Las Vegas fumble, the Florida workouts, the "about time" comment, the live Watson endorsement at OTA 5, Shedeur Sanders has not publicly called out Jerry Jeudy a single time. After the sideline confrontation on national television, his response was, "We resolved that. We're not going to speak on that." After the Las Vegas fumble that directly affected his stat line during one of his strongest performances, he said nothing about Jeudy publicly. He kept competing. After the documented private Florida workouts with Watson instead of him, there was no public comment, no passive-aggressive media answer, no pointed remarks about receiver loyalty or chemistry. After the "about time" comment on camera, Shedeur continued showing up to compete. After the live Watson endorsement at OTA 5, he was still at the facility, still working, still letting his performance speak. That is not an accident or an oversight. That is a documented pattern of choosing the professional response at every moment where a different quarterback might have chosen public retaliation. The receiver who dropped Shedeur's passes, confronted him on national television, fumbled during his strongest game of the season, flew to Florida to work out with the competition, and praised Watson on live media, has never been publicly called out by Shedeur Sanders. And the quarterback who was labeled emotional and difficult, has quietly and repeatedly chosen the high road while the receiver who initiated every one of these moments continued to undermine him in front of cameras. The Browns organization drafted Denzel Boston and developed Isaiah Bond because the depth chart decisions in professional football are based on production, conduct, and reliability, and the Jeudy timeline across 2025 and the 2026 offseason has raised serious questions on all three fronts simultaneously. What puts Jerry Jeudy in the most serious trouble of his Cleveland Browns career is not the drops in isolation, receivers drop passes. It is not the Watson preference in isolation, players develop working relationships with certain quarterbacks. It is the combination of the two, delivered publicly, repeatedly, at the most visible competition evaluation moment of the entire 2026 offseason, while the offensive coordinator is telling media that nobody is ahead, while coaches are praising Shedeur's development, and while Denzel Boston is winning individual matchups against starting NFL corners one rep at a time. When the entire organizational message is, "This competition is open," and the starting receiver goes on live television and says the other quarterback looks real good while dropping passes after an offseason of concentration drills, the receiver has broken the organizational message. Publicly. On camera. On record. That is documented. The words are recorded. The depth chart is shifting. Denzel Boston is one impressive training camp away from making the WR1 conversation permanent. Jerry Jeudy has one clear path back from this offseason: catch every ball, keep his Watson preference off live television, and produce at a level that his $10.3 million salary demands. The question is whether he is capable of executing that path, or whether OTA 5 was the moment the Browns receiver depth chart began permanently moving on from him. If this breakdown gave you the full picture of what is happening in Cleveland, drop your take in the comments right now. Is Denzel Boston already the Browns' WR1 in practice? And is Shedeur Sanders the starting quarterback by week 1? We want to hear exactly where you stand. If this channel is giving you the coverage on the Shedeur Sanders story and the Browns QB competition that the mainstream NFL media is not delivering, hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed. We cover every angle, every depth chart move, and every moment the talking heads are sleeping on. Hit the bell so you never miss an upload.